The Vrakith warship descended through the clouds like a metal god, its shadow covering the entire city of Myra 7. The Corvani people had no weapons that could touch it. They had spent 10,000 years building a peaceful civilization, one filled with art and music and the careful study of stars. They had never needed weapons. Now they wished they had. Supreme Commander Threx watched from the bridge as his soldiers poured out of the landing craft. The Corvani were small creatures, barely reaching his chest, with soft blue skin and large eyes made for seeing beauty in the universe. They would make excellent slaves. "Begin the harvest," Threx ordered, his voice like grinding stone. The Vrakith were conquerors. For 200 years they had moved across the galaxy, taking planet after planet. They were tall and strong, with gray skin as hard as armor and 4 arms that could tear through metal. No species had ever stopped them. No species had ever tried. In the streets of Myra 7, a young Corvani named Seelith watched as her mother was dragged away by Vrakith soldiers. She screamed and tried to run after them, but her father held her back. "We cannot fight them," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We can only survive." This was how it always began. The Vrakith would take the strongest for labor, the smartest for technical work, and the rest would be sorted into whatever roles served the Empire best. Resistance meant death. Cooperation meant survival, even if that survival was a kind of living death. Within 3 days, the Corvani civilization was broken. Their beautiful towers became Vrakith barracks. Their art museums became storage for weapons. Their concert halls became processing centers where families were separated and sent to different parts of the Empire. Seelith found herself on a transport ship, packed in with hundreds of other young Corvani. They were heading to a place called the Forge, a massive space station where slaves worked until they died. The average lifespan there was 2 years. But something strange happened on the 5th day of their journey. The transport ship shook violently. Alarms screamed through the metal corridors. The Vrakith guards looked confused, then afraid. "What is happening?" an old Corvani asked. No one answered. The ship shook again, and this time they heard something new. Explosions, fighting, the sound of weapons fire, but not the deep boom of Vrakith guns. This was something sharper, faster, like lightning made into sound. The door to their holding cell exploded inward, and Seelith saw her first human. He was shorter than the Vrakith but built like coiled steel. His skin was brown, his eyes were dark, and he wore armor that seemed to drink in the light. In his hands was a weapon still smoking from recent fire. "Everyone stay calm," he said, his voice steady and warm. "I'm Sergeant Marcus Cole, United Earth Defense Force. We're here to take you home." Seelith did not understand. No one came to save slaves. No one fought the Vrakith. It was impossible. But more humans poured into the room, moving with a speed and precision that seemed almost unreal. They checked on the prisoners, offered water and food, and spoke in gentle voices even as the battle raged around them. "How?" Seelith managed to ask. Sergeant Cole smiled, and it was the first kind smile she had seen in weeks. "Humanity has a saying," he told her. "We don't leave anyone behind." On the bridge of the human warship Resolute, Captain Sarah Chen watched as her fighters tore through the Vrakith escort fleet. The enemy ships were larger, more heavily armed, but they were slow. They relied on fear and overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy that refused to be afraid. "Vrakith flagship is trying to retreat," her tactical officer reported. "Don't let them," Chen said. "Every ship that escapes will warn the Empire. Every ship that escapes means more planets burned, more people enslaved." The human fighters swarmed like angry insects, their pilots pushing their craft to limits that should have been fatal. But humans had a gift for surviving what should kill them. They had spent their entire history doing the impossible, and space was just one more frontier to conquer. The Vrakith flagship broke apart under concentrated fire, its escape pods scattering into the void. The battle was over in less than an hour. Far away, on the conquered world of Korvax Prime, a message began to spread through the underground networks that the slaves used to communicate. It was just 3 words, but those words changed everything. Humans are coming. The Vrakith had ruled the galaxy through fear for 200 years. They had conquered 47 species and enslaved billions of beings. They believed they were the apex predators of the universe, the ultimate power that nothing could challenge. They had never encountered humans. Humanity had discovered faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. In that time, they had spread across a dozen star systems, building colonies and stations with the frantic energy that defined their species. They were loud, chaotic, and seemingly unable to agree on anything. But when they found the first Vrakith slave ship, something changed. The human crew of the exploration vessel Dawn's Light had stumbled upon a transport carrying 300 Pelori, a gentle species of feathered beings who had been conquered 60 years earlier. The Pelori had given up hope generations ago. They expected the humans to ignore them or, worse, to join with the Vrakith. Instead, the humans attacked. It was a small ship against a massive transport with a military escort. The odds were impossible, but the Dawn's Light crew had looked at those prisoners and seen something that demanded action. They had seen suffering, and humans could not witness suffering without trying to end it. The Dawn's Light was destroyed, but not before sending a message back to Earth. The message included recordings from the transport, images of the conditions the slaves endured, testimonies from the Pelori about what the Vrakith had done to their world. Humanity's response was immediate and absolute. Within a year, the United Earth government had authorized the largest military buildup in human history. Factories that had been making consumer goods now produced warships. Scientists who had been studying distant stars now designed weapons. Young men and women who had never thought about war signed up in numbers that overwhelmed recruitment centers. The first fleet launched 18 months after the Dawn's Light sent its final transmission. Its mission was simple: find the Vrakith, break their power, and free every slave in their empire. The galaxy was about to learn why you should never make humanity angry. On the jungle world of Thraxis, the Gorth had served the Vrakith for 90 years. They were massive creatures, 4 meters tall with 6 legs and thick armor like skin. The Vrakith used them as heavy laborers, working them in mines and construction until their bodies gave out. Elder Kroneth had been born into slavery. His parents had been born into slavery. He had never known freedom, had never even dreamed of it. Freedom was a concept as foreign to him as the color of a star he had never seen. Then the humans came. They dropped from the sky in metal pods that buried themselves in the ground like seeds. When the pods opened, soldiers came out, already firing at the Vrakith overseers. The battle lasted less than an hour. A human woman approached Kroneth after the fighting stopped. She was tiny compared to him, barely reaching his middle leg. But she looked up at him without fear, and her eyes held something he did not recognize. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka," she said. "You're free now." Kroneth did not understand the word, free. "Free," she repeated. "No more masters, no more chains, you belong to yourself." For the first time in 90 years, a Gorth wept. The word spread. Humans are coming. In slave camps and conquered cities, in mining colonies and factory stations, the whisper passed from being to being. It was more than a promise. It was a hope that no one had dared to feel for generations. And the Vrakith began to fear. Supreme Commander Threx received the reports with growing rage. 3 transport fleets destroyed. 2 mining colonies liberated. A garrison world attacked and overrun in a single day. These humans were everywhere, striking without warning, disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. "What are they?" he demanded of his intelligence officers. The answer they gave him made no sense. Humans were a young species, barely a century into space travel. They came from a single small planet circling an unremarkable star. They were weak, short-lived, and seemingly fragile. Yet they fought like nothing the Vrakith had ever seen. They did not surrender when outnumbered. They did not flee when wounded. They did not stop when victory seemed impossible. They just kept coming, wave after wave, as if the concept of defeat did not exist in their minds. "They are insane," one officer suggested. "No," Threx said slowly. "They are something worse. They believe they are right." And that, he was beginning to understand, made them the most dangerous enemy the Vrakith had ever faced. The liberation had begun. Captain Chen stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching as another world was freed. The Pelori colony of Sanctuary had been under Vrakith control for 60 years. Now the enemy flag was burning, and the people were emerging from their hiding places to see the sky without fear. "Admiral Okonkwo is on the line," her communications officer reported. She took the call in her ready room. Admiral Okonkwo was a tall woman with gray hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. She commanded the entire Liberation Fleet, and she looked tired. "Good work on Sanctuary," the Admiral said, "but we've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that changes everything." Okonkwo brought up a holographic display. "Vrakith High Command has issued new orders. They're pulling back from the outer territories." Chen frowned. "They're retreating. They're consolidating. They're gathering their entire fleet at a single point. We're looking at over 2,000 warships." The number hung in the air. Humanity's Liberation Fleet had 300 ships. They had won through speed and surprise, striking where the enemy was weak. They could not win a direct battle against those odds. "Where are they gathering?" Chen asked. "Korvax Prime, the Corvani homeworld. It's the administrative center of their empire. If we want to end this war, we have to take it." Okonkwo paused. "And they know it." Chen thought of the Corvani prisoners she had helped rescue. She thought of Seelith, the young woman who had asked how humans could possibly fight the Vrakith. "Then we take it," she said, "whatever it costs." Admiral Okonkwo smiled, and for a moment she looked like the young officer she had once been. "I was hoping you'd say that. Start planning the assault. We move in 30 days. 30 days to plan an attack against impossible odds. 30 days to figure out how to save a world. 30 days until the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy." For humans, it was more than enough time. On the slave transport that had been captured weeks ago, Seelith sat in a human medical bay while a doctor checked her injuries. The doctor was a young man with gentle hands and a warm smile. He spoke to her in her own language, which he had learned from a translation device. "You'll be fine," he said. "A few more days of rest and nutrition and you'll be back to full health." "And then what?" Seelith asked. "Then whatever you want," he shrugged. "We're taking you to a safe place, a colony where other freed Corvani are gathering. You can wait there until the war is over, rebuild your life." "What if I don't want to wait?" The words surprised her as much as they surprised him. "What if I want to fight?" The doctor was quiet for a moment. Then he called for Sergeant Cole. The soldier entered the medical bay with the same steady confidence he had shown during the rescue. "I heard you want to join the fight." "They took my mother," Seelith said. "They took everyone I loved. I cannot just sit and wait while others die for my freedom." Cole nodded slowly. "It's dangerous, you could die." "I could have died in the forge. At least this death would mean something." He studied her for a long moment, then he smiled. "Welcome to the resistance." The war was just beginning, and it would be fought not just by humans, but by every species that had ever known the cruelty of the Vrakith. The conquered were becoming the liberators, and the galaxy would never be the same. News of the human liberation fleet spread like fire across the Vrakith Empire. In every slave camp and conquered city, Beings who had given up hope began to remember what it felt like to dream. And in the great war rooms of the Vrakith, the masters who had never known fear began to understand what it was like to be prey. The humans were coming, and they would not stop until every chain was broken. The preparations for the assault on Korvax Prime consumed every resource humanity had. Shipyards worked around the clock, crews barely sleeping as they repaired damaged vessels and built new ones. Training camps on a dozen worlds pushed soldiers beyond their limits, preparing them for the greatest battle in human history. Seelith found herself in one of those camps, surrounded by beings from a dozen species. There were Gorth towering over everyone, their massive forms casting long shadows. There were Pelori, their colorful feathers bright against the gray walls. There were Tresic, insectoid beings with quick minds and quicker reflexes. And there were humans everywhere, training everyone. Sergeant Cole became her instructor. He was patient but demanding, pushing her harder than she had ever been pushed. "You're thinking too much," he told her during combat training. "When the enemy attacks, you won't have time to think. You need to react." "How do humans learn to react so quickly?" Cole laughed. "Our planet is trying to kill us from the moment we're born. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, each other. We either learn to react or we die. Evolution made us survivors." Seelith had learned about Earth in her training. It seemed impossible that such a violent, chaotic world could produce a species capable of what humans had accomplished. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps all that struggle had forged them into something unique. The weeks passed quickly. Seelith learned to shoot, to fight hand-to-hand, to operate communication equipment, to move silently through enemy territory. She was not the strongest or the fastest, but she had something that Cole said was more important. "Determination," he told her. "You don't give up. That's worth more than any physical advantage." Finally, the day came. The entire Liberation fleet gathered at a staging point in empty space, far from any Vrakith sensors. 300 human warships, supported by 73 vessels crewed by freed slaves who had chosen to fight. It was still outnumbered 7-1, but Admiral Okonkwo had a plan. The briefing was held on the Resolute, broadcast to every ship in the fleet. Okonkwo stood before a massive holographic display showing Korvax Prime and the enemy fleet surrounding it. "The Vrakith expect a frontal assault," she began. "They've positioned their fleet in a defensive sphere, protecting every approach to the planet. In a straight fight, they would destroy us." She manipulated the display, highlighting several points in space around the system. "But we're not going to give them a straight fight. We're going to give them chaos." The plan was audacious, perhaps even insane. The fleet would split into 15 separate groups, each approaching the system from a different direction. They would use hit-and-run tactics, striking at the edges of the enemy formation, drawing ships away from their defensive positions. Meanwhile, a specialized task force would slip through the confusion and land directly on Korvax Prime. Their mission was to reach the planetary capital and trigger a slave uprising. If they succeeded, the Vrakith would have to pull ships back to deal with rebellion on the surface, weakening their defensive sphere. "It's risky," Okonkwo admitted. "We'll take losses, but if we win, we break the back of the Vrakith Empire forever." Seelith was assigned to the ground assault team, along with Sergeant Cole and a mixed unit of humans and freed slaves. They would be among the first to land, the spearhead of the liberation. The night before the battle, Seelith found herself unable to sleep. She wandered the corridors of the Resolute until she reached an observation deck. Captain Chen was already there, staring out at the stars. "Couldn't sleep either?" Chen asked. "No," Seelith stood beside her, looking out at the infinite darkness. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," Chen admitted. "Only a fool wouldn't be, but I've learned that fear isn't the enemy. It's what you do with the fear that matters." "What do you do with it?" Chen smiled. "I use it. Fear keeps me sharp, keeps me alive, but it doesn't control me. When the battle starts, I'll be afraid, but I'll do my job anyway. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. They stood in silence for a while, two beings from different worlds sharing a moment of connection. "Why do humans do this?" Seelith finally asked. "You could have stayed safe in your own space. The Vrakith would not have attacked you for decades, perhaps centuries. Why risk everything for strangers?" Chen considered the question carefully. "Because we know what it's like to suffer. Human history is filled with horrors, times when we enslaved each other, committed terrible atrocities against our own kind. We learned, slowly and painfully, that no one is truly free until everyone is free." That seems very idealistic. Maybe, but idealism is what drives us forward. The belief that things can be better, that we can be better. Every great achievement in human history started with someone believing the impossible was possible. She turned to face Seelith directly. "Tomorrow, we're going to do something impossible. We're going to defeat an empire that has never been defeated, and we're going to do it because we believe we can." Seelith thought about her mother, about her world, about everyone she had lost. "I believe," she said quietly. Chen nodded. "Then you're already one of us." The fleet jumped into Korvax Prime's system at precisely 600 hours, human time. Immediately, everything descended into controlled chaos. The Vrakith commanders had expected a single attack vector, a massed fleet charging directly at their defensive line. Instead, they faced enemies appearing from every direction at once. Sensors lit up with dozens of contacts, each group too small to pose a real threat but too dangerous to ignore. Supreme Commander Threx stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with growing frustration. "They're trying to draw us out," he realized. "Hold formation. Don't let them scatter us." But it was too easy to say, too hard to do. Human fighters were everywhere, darting in to strike at exposed ships, then retreating before they could be destroyed. Every time a Vrakith vessel pursued them, it opened a gap in the defensive sphere. And through one of those gaps, the ground assault team slipped past. The transport ship carrying Seelith was small and fast, its stealth systems hiding it from enemy sensors. They burned hard for the planet, ignoring the battle raging around them. 10 minutes to atmosphere," the pilot reported. Seelith gripped her weapon tightly, trying to control her breathing. Around her, the other members of the assault team made their final preparations. Some prayed. Some checked their equipment for the 10th time. Some simply sat with their eyes closed, finding calm before the storm. Sergeant Cole moved through the compartment, offering words of encouragement to each soldier. When he reached Seelith, he simply put a hand on her shoulder. "Remember your training," he said. "Stick close to me, and whatever happens, don't stop moving. I won't let you down." "I know you won't." The transport hit the atmosphere hard, flames licking at the windows as they plunged toward the surface. Anti-aircraft fire began to reach for them, streaks of energy lighting up the sky. "Landing zone is hot," the pilot announced. "Prepare for immediate disembarkment." The transport slammed into the ground with a bone-jarring impact. Before Seelith could even catch her breath, the doors were open and Cole was pulling her out into the chaos. Korvax Prime was beautiful, even now. The architecture of her people soared around them, graceful towers and sweeping bridges that had survived a century of occupation. But between those elegant structures, war had arrived. Vrakith soldiers poured toward the landing site, their weapons filling the air with deadly energy. Human soldiers returned fire, their guns crackling with that distinctive lightning sound. Bodies fell on both sides. "Move," Cole shouted, leading his team toward the nearest cover. They ran through streets that Seelith had never seen but somehow recognized. This was her homeworld, the place her parents had been born, the planet her people had built over 10,000 years. Now she was fighting to reclaim it. The first objective was a communication tower at the edge of the city. If they could capture it, they could broadcast to every slave on the planet, calling them to rise against their masters. The journey was brutal. They lost 3 soldiers in the first 5 minutes, cut down by Vrakith snipers. They lost 2 more when a grenade landed in their midst. Seelith kept moving, as Cole had told her, ignoring the death around her. They reached the tower just as Vrakith reinforcements arrived. What followed was 20 minutes of close-quarters fighting, the most intense combat Seelith had ever experienced. She fired her weapon until it overheated, then grabbed another from a fallen soldier. She fought beside humans and Gorth and Pelori, all of them bleeding together for a common cause. Finally it was over. The tower was theirs. Cole was wounded, a burn mark across his shoulder that looked painful but not fatal. He pushed Seelith toward the control panel. "You know the language," he said. "You know the people make the broadcast." Seelith's hands trembled as she activated the system. Then she began to speak. "People of Korvax Prime, this is Seelith of the Corvani. I was born after the conquest, raised as a slave, and told that freedom was impossible. I believed that lie for all my life." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Today, I am standing in our ancestral capital, fighting alongside the humans who came to set us free. They are not gods or saviors. They are simply people who refuse to accept that evil should triumph. They came because they believe that every being deserves liberty, and they are willing to die for that belief. The Vrakith have ruled us for a century. They told us we were weak, that we could never fight back, that resistance was futile. They were wrong. Rise up, my people. Rise up, all the enslaved peoples of this world. The humans cannot free us alone. We must free ourselves. Today is the day we take back our future." She cut the transmission and turned to Cole. Was that good enough? He grinned through his pain. Perfect. Within hours, the uprising began. In the mining districts, Gorth workers turned their tools into weapons. In the factories, Tresic sabotaged production lines and overwhelmed their guards. In the streets of every city, Corvani emerged from their hiding places and joined the fight. The Vrakith garrison was overwhelmed. They had expected to maintain order with a small force, relying on fear and the slave population's compliance. Now that population was rising against them, and there were not enough soldiers to stop them. Supreme Commander Threx received the reports with cold fury. "Pull ships back from the orbital defense. We need ground reinforcements." It was exactly what Admiral Okonkwo had predicted. The gaps in the defensive sphere widened. Human warships poured through them, engaging the Vrakith fleet at close range where their speed and agility gave them an advantage. The Battle of Korvax Prime lasted 12 hours. When it was over, the Vrakith had lost over 1,000 ships, and their supreme commander was dead, killed when his flagship was destroyed by a human torpedo strike. But the human victory came at a terrible cost. 107 human vessels were destroyed. 23 Allied ships crewed by freed slaves never made it home. Over 40,000 soldiers died on the ground, humans and liberated peoples fighting side by side. Seelith survived, though barely. She was found under rubble near the communication tower, unconscious but alive. Cole had shielded her with his own body when a building collapsed. He didn't survive. When Seelith woke in a field hospital, she was told that the war was not yet over. The Vrakith Empire was broken, but scattered remnants still fought on. It would take months, perhaps years, to finish the liberation. But Korvax Prime was free. Her homeworld was free. And for the first time in a century, her people could look up at the stars without fear. A human nurse brought her food and water. As Seelith ate, she asked the question that had been burning in her mind. How do you do it? How do humans keep fighting when the cost is so high? The nurse, a young woman with kind eyes, considered the question. Because giving up would cost more. We've seen what happens when good people do nothing. We've watched our own history repeat the same mistakes over and over. Eventually, we learned that the only way to stop evil is to stand against it, no matter what. It seems so hard. It is hard. Every person we lose is a tragedy, but every person we save is a victory, and the victories matter more than the losses. Seelith thought about Sergeant Cole, about his sacrifice, about the way he had believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. "I want to keep fighting," she said. The nurse smiled. "Then rest now, get strong, and when you're ready, we'll find you a place in the fight." Seelith closed her eyes, exhausted but determined. The liberation was not finished. There were still worlds to free, still peoples to save, still chains to break. And she would be there when they did it. The galaxy was changing, one battle at a time. The fall of Korvax Prime sent shockwaves through what remained of the Vrakith Empire. For the first time in 2 centuries, the conquerors were being conquered. Their central command was gone, their fleet was scattered, and their slave population was rising against them on 100 worlds. Admiral Okonkwo established a temporary headquarters on the surface of Korvax Prime, in the same building that had once housed the Vrakith colonial administration. The irony was not lost on anyone. "We've received surrender requests from 43 garrison worlds," her aide reported, "and intelligence suggests at least 20 more are considering it." "Accept the surrenders but verify them carefully," Okonkwo ordered. "I don't want any surprises. What about the holdout sectors?" 3 major ones: the Craven System, the Outer Reaches, and the Forge. The Forge. Seelith felt a chill run through her when she heard the name. That was where she had been heading when the humans rescued her. That was where countless thousands of slaves were still suffering. "The Forge is the priority," Okonkwo decided. "It's their largest industrial center and their most brutal labor camp. If we can liberate it, we cut off their ability to rebuild." The liberation of the Forge would be Seelith's next mission. She had recovered from her injuries, though she still bore scars both visible and invisible. Cole's death haunted her dreams, but it also drove her forward. She would not let his sacrifice be in vain. The fleet that assembled for the Forge assault was different from the one that had attacked Korvax Prime. Alongside the human warships were vessels crewed entirely by freed slaves. Corvani pilots flew interceptors they had built themselves. Gorth operated heavy cruisers with crews that had never known freedom until months ago. The liberation was no longer just a human effort. It had become something larger. Captain Chen commanded the assault group, her reputation having grown to near-legendary status among the liberated peoples. When Seelith was assigned to her ship, she felt both honored and terrified. "I remember you," Chen said when they met. "From that night before Korvax Prime, you asked me why humans do this." "I remember," Seelith replied. "I think I understand now." "Do you?" "It's not just about justice or idealism. It's about who you choose to be. Humans choose to be the ones who fight for others. That choice makes you who you are." Chen smiled and there was approval in her eyes. "You've learned a lot." "I had good teachers." The journey to the Forge took 3 weeks. During that time, Seelith trained with the ground assault teams, preparing for what would be her most difficult mission yet. The Forge was heavily defended, its Vrakith garrison reinforced by soldiers fleeing from other fronts. They would not give up easily. But the real challenge was what they would find inside. The Forge had been operating for over a century, processing millions of slaves through its deadly production lines. The conditions there were the worst in the Empire, the average survival time measured in months rather than years. "Be prepared for what you'll see," the mission commander told them. "It won't be easy, but remember why we're there. Those people need us." They jumped into the Forge system with weapons hot, immediately engaging the defensive fleet. The battle was fierce but brief. The Vrakith defenders had been weakened by defections and supply shortages, and they could not match the determination of the Liberation fleet. Within 2 hours, the space around the forge was clear. The ground assault began. Sealith's transport landed near the central processing facility, the heart of the station's slave operation. The moment she stepped onto the surface, she understood what the commander had meant. The smell hit her first. Death and despair and suffering concentrated into a physical sensation that made her stomach turn. Then she saw the bodies. They were everywhere. Slaves who had been worked to death and simply left where they fell. Bodies stacked against walls too numerous to bury. The evidence of a cruelty so systematic, so industrial, that it defied comprehension. "Keep moving," her squad leader ordered. "We can mourn later. Right now, we save who we can." They pushed into the facility, clearing it room by room. Vrakith guards who resisted were killed without mercy. Those who surrendered were taken prisoner, though some of the freed slave soldiers looked at them with eyes that promised future justice. In the deepest level of the facility, they found the living. Thousands of beings crammed into cells meant for hundreds. Corvani and Gorth and Pelori and a dozen other species, all reduced to skin and bones, all staring at their rescuers with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. Sealith approached a group of Corvani, speaking gently in their shared language. "It's over, you're free. We've come to take you home." An elderly woman reached out with trembling hands, touching Sealith's face as if to confirm she was real. "We heard the broadcasts," she whispered. "We prayed, but we didn't dare to believe." "Believe it," Sealith said, tears streaming down her face. "The nightmare is over." The liberation of the forge took 4 days. In that time, they freed over 200,000 slaves and captured enough evidence of Vrakith atrocities to fill 1,000 databases. The scale of the suffering was almost beyond comprehension. But for every horror they discovered, they also found hope. Slaves who had maintained their dignity despite everything. Communities that had formed in the darkness, protecting each other and keeping alive the dream of freedom. Acts of kindness and courage that had persisted even in the depths of hell. Among the freed was a Corvani woman named Tureth. Sealith found her in a medical ward, recovering from years of malnutrition and abuse. When their eyes met, Sealith felt her heart stop. "Mother." The recognition was slow, Tureth's mind still clouded by trauma and exhaustion. But then understanding dawned, and she held out her arms. Sealith fell into her embrace, sobbing like a child. They held each other for a long time, mother and daughter reunited after a separation they had both believed would last forever. "I looked for you," Sealith said through her tears. "Every planet we liberated, I looked." "I knew you would," Tureth whispered. "I never stopped believing you would find me." The reunion was one of countless others that took place as the liberation continued. Families torn apart by the Vrakith were brought back together. Friends who had been separated decades ago were reunited. The bonds that the Empire had tried to destroy proved stronger than any chain. As the months passed, the Vrakith resistance crumbled. One by one, the holdout systems fell or surrendered. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 2 centuries was reduced to scattered remnants, hunted and desperate. The final battle took place in the Vrakith home system, around the world that had spawned the conquerors. It was the most heavily defended position in known space, the place where the remaining Vrakith had gathered for a last stand. Admiral Okonkwo led the assault personally, commanding from the bridge of the newly commissioned flagship, the Unity. It was the largest ship ever built by humans, its crew a mix of every species that had joined the liberation. "All ships report status," Okonkwo ordered. The responses came in from every corner of the fleet. Human vessels, Corvani interceptors, Gorth heavy cruisers, Pelori scout ships. 347 vessels, crewed by beings who had once been enemies or strangers, now united by a common cause. "Begin the assault," Okonkwo commanded. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Vrakith fought with the desperation of those who knew they had nothing left to lose. They threw everything they had at the Liberation Fleet, holding nothing back. But it was not enough. The turning point came when a squad of Corvani pilots, including Sealith, broke through the defensive perimeter and struck directly at the Vrakith command station. It was a suicide mission by any rational calculation, but the pilots had volunteered without hesitation. "For everyone they killed," Sealith said as she lined up her attack run. "For everyone they enslaved. For Sergeant Cole, for all of us." Her missiles struck the station's reactor, triggering a cascade failure that turned the massive structure into an expanding ball of flame. The Vrakith command network went down, throwing their defenders into chaos. The Liberation Fleet pressed the advantage. Ship after ship fell to their coordinated attacks. The Vrakith resistance fragmented, then collapsed. When the last enemy vessel was destroyed, a strange silence fell over the fleet. They had done it. The Vrakith Empire was finished. The galaxy was free. Admiral Okonkwo's voice broke the silence, broadcast to every ship, every station, every liberated world. "Today, we have accomplished something that many believed impossible. We have ended the greatest tyranny the galaxy has ever known. We have freed billions of beings from chains they never thought could be broken." But this victory did not belong to any single species or any single fleet. It belongs to all of us. Humans and Corvani, Gorth and Pelori, Tresic and 100 other peoples. We fought together, bled together, and won together. Now comes the harder work. Building a galaxy where this can never happen again. Creating a future where every being is free and every species is equal. It will take time and effort and sacrifice, but we have proven that we are capable of anything when we stand united. Today we celebrate. Tomorrow we begin to build. The celebration lasted for days, spreading across every liberated world. On Korvax Prime, Sealith stood with her mother and watched the fireworks bloom across the sky they had once feared to look upon. "What will you do now?" Turith asked. Sealith considered the question. The war was over, but her journey was not finished. She had learned too much, changed too much, to simply return to what she had been before. "Help rebuild," she decided. "There's so much work to be done. Worlds to heal, peoples to reunite, a new order to create. I want to be part of that." Turith smiled with the pride that only a mother can feel. "You've become remarkable, my daughter." "I had help." Sealith thought of Cole, of Chen, of all the humans who had shown her what it meant to fight for something larger than yourself. "They taught me that anything is possible if you believe in it enough." In the months that followed, the galaxy underwent a transformation. The United Liberation Council was formed, bringing together representatives from every freed species and the human government. They began the long process of rebuilding what the Vrakith had destroyed. It was not easy. Centuries of oppression had left deep scars that would take generations to heal. There were disputes and conflicts, old grudges that threatened to tear apart the new alliance, but somehow they persevered. The humans played a unique role in this new order. They had come as warriors, but they stayed as builders. Human engineers helped reconstruct cities. Human doctors treated the wounded. Human teachers established schools on worlds that had forgotten what education meant. "Why do you stay?" asked Elder Kroneth of the Gorth, now a respected member of the council. The human ambassador, a gray-haired woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, smiled. "Because we're invested now. Your future is our future. Your success is our success. We're all connected. You could return to your own worlds. You have accomplished what you came to do." "We accomplished the easy part," Martinez replied. "Winning the war. The hard part is winning the peace. We don't walk away from hard things." 10 years after the liberation, a monument was erected on Korvax Prime. It stood in the center of the capital city, a towering sculpture that depicted humans and Corvani and Gorth and Pelori and Tresic, all standing together, hands linked. At its base was an inscription in every language of every species that had fought for freedom. They came as strangers, they fought as allies, they left as family, in remembrance of all who gave their lives so that others might be free. Seelith attended the dedication ceremony with her mother, who had recovered fully and now served on the Corvani Reconstruction Committee. Captain Chen was there, promoted to admiral, her hair now gray but her eyes still sharp. Survivors of the liberation stood alongside children who had been born into freedom. Admiral Chen gave the dedication speech. Her voice was strong but emotional as she spoke. 15 years ago, a small human exploration ship stumbled upon a slave transport. The crew of the Dawn's Light could have ignored what they found. They could have decided it was not their problem. Instead, they attacked, knowing they could not win because they could not look away from suffering. Every person standing here today owes their freedom to that choice. That single moment of courage that sparked a revolution across the galaxy. The crew of the Dawn's Light did not survive to see what they began, but their spirit lives on in all of us. Humans have a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. The Dawn's Light proved that when good people choose to act, evil cannot stand. Today, we honor not just the fallen but the living, every being who fought, every being who survived, every being who refused to give up hope even in the darkest times. You are all heroes. And to those who come after us who will inherit the galaxy we have built, remember this: freedom is not a gift that can be given. It is a right that must be defended. Stay vigilant, stay united, and never forget what it cost to get here. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence, then a cheer that seemed to shake the planet itself. Seelith felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at the monument. She had been a slave. She had been a soldier. Now she was something else entirely, a symbol of what was possible when beings refused to accept that evil was inevitable. That night, she walked through the streets of the capital, streets her grandparents had walked before the conquest. Children played in gardens that had once been work camps. Couples strolled hand in hand under stars that had once been symbols of oppression. A human soldier passed her, part of the peacekeeping force that still maintained order during the transition. He nodded respectfully and she nodded back. Once, humans had been strangers. Now they were neighbors, partners, friends. The galaxy was not perfect. It would never be perfect. There were still problems to solve, wounds to heal, challenges to face. But for the first time in centuries, there was hope. Real hope, based not on wishes but on evidence that change was possible. Seelith thought about all the beings she had met during the war, the humans who had taught her to fight, the Gorth who had shown her the strength of those who had suffered longest, the Pelori who had demonstrated that hope could survive anything. All of them had contributed to this moment. She found herself at a small memorial garden near the edge of the city. It was dedicated to the human soldiers who had died on Korvax Prime during the liberation. One of the names on the wall was Marcus Cole. Seelith knelt before his name, placing her hand on the cold stone. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me, for believing in us, for everything." The wind stirred, carrying the sound of children laughing somewhere nearby. It was the sound of a future that Cole had died to create, a future he would never see but had made possible. Seelith stood and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, more humans were exploring, reaching ever outward into the unknown. Somewhere out there, new species were being discovered, new friendships were being formed. The age of conquest was over. The age of liberation had come. And it had all started because humans arrived. Human beings, with their short lives and their loud voices and their stubborn refusal to accept that anything was impossible. Human beings who saw suffering and could not look away. Human beings who had once enslaved each other but had learned, painfully and slowly, that freedom was worth fighting for. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy was free. And across all the liberated worlds, whenever beings gathered to remember the war that had changed everything, They raised their voices in a chant that had become universal. A chant that celebrated those who had come from a small blue planet to save strangers they had never met. Humanity, humanity, humanity. It was the sound of gratitude. It was the sound of hope. It was the sound of a future built by those who had believed, against all evidence, that better things were possible. And somewhere in a quiet corner of the afterlife, Sergeant Marcus Cole smiled. His people had done well.